Welcome back. So we're always solving problems every second of the day, whether it's for our clients, whether it's for within our organization, whether in personal lives, or whether it's just for the betterment of our organization. What if you could become so good at your job that problem solver or fixer became your middle name? April, welcome to the show. April Fixer Syed. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Tell us more about that. So, what was it that led you to gaining such a reputation in the previous roles that you've worked at of being a fixer?
Gosh, what gave me that reputation? I think the reputation of just going in and fixing things, taking ownership, extreme ownership of issues that, a business or a leader might have been having, examining those, understanding maybe and breaking them down, what needs to happen, and then really motivating a wide variety of people to get some of those things done, managing that change, looking at that change, monitoring it, and reporting back. So I think those are the key elements of kind of like being a fixer. But, that first part of like the diagnosis and analyzing where maybe the problem is, maybe the magic that sometimes I can't explain.
Do you think that journey started with you internally? Like you fixed something or a mindset that you fixed within yourself, and then that allowed you to look outwardly and say, these are the frameworks that I can apply. This is a different take on what everyone else is seeing.
I think I was actually born a fixer. I remember at an exceptionally young age, like 4, sitting in the back of a car with my brother and thinking, like, scenario planning. What if the car door were to open? What would I grab onto that would save me or save my brother? I was always running a variety of different scenarios, and there's no reason to say why at a young age that behavior or that thought process would have been there. But at an exceptionally early age, I had that. So the way I looked at the world was looking at various different scenarios that could happen and trying to predict solutions to those various things. You fast forward into the business world, and luckily, I found mentors that helped accelerate that. And my mentor gave me this book assignment to read, Synchronicity by Joseph Jaworski. It was the first kind of book I had read of that particular kind. And he talked about working for Bain and Company, big, consulting firm, and the scenario planning that they were doing with big oil. And that helped me define and give language to maybe what I already had been doing inside of my mind, but maybe I just hadn't really had the language to describe it before.
Okay. Now, you've had a pretty great journey so far, and now you have a Purcher Codex. So, how does your current company, your current job, your current career, how was that one of the scenarios that you had planned previously, and what led you to that outcome?
Well, I would love to say that it was planning, but I think, again, sometimes things happen because the opportunities present themselves in front of you. It had a wonderful career at Sage. I like to say that I grew up there. I got to work with a bunch of wonderful leaders. And I also worked in an environment where there was a lot of strong female leaders as well.
Hmm.
So it didn't um, create the maybe keeping more silent or, feeling any different about my capabilities. In fact, it was the opposite. I felt like it was a very flourishing environment. And I got to work with some wonderful people who really let me take on a lot of big things. So, at one time I was managing 3 different product lines. I was handling all of North American NPS, especially programs or products that had issues with NPS. I was the fixer that was going in and fixing and running like year-long projects to help right size NPS and move those. I was also doing partner education. We developed a partner program for smaller partners to help them grow their business. And I really, really loved that work. My dad was an entrepreneur. I grew up in an entrepreneurial household. And I think that type of work made me feel like I was changing someone's life, their ability to provide for their family. So, fast forward, I went out into the channel, worked at the channel. I did some different projects. I wanted to learn about AI. I went to work for Bloomreach, worked with really large brands in the world. And my father had passed away about the same time. And it really caused this reflection of like, okay, what was it that I loved about my entire career? If I could only do that and I only had a limited time left in this world, what would I want to do? And that's when it kind of came back to I want to work with founders. I want to help them grow their company because that's the most rewarding, I think, out of my career when I was working with those partners at Sage, smaller partners, helping them grow their practice. Those are relationships that I've had forever with those people. You know, when you impact someone's business and help them change. And my philosophy was, you know, I was a product line that maybe was 1/10 of their business. But if I helped them grow their whole business, my 10% grew. And that was a lot easier for me than trying to take my product line from being 10% of their business to 20%, for instance. I just grew their whole company. And it was really rewarding work. And that's the type or style of work that I get to do today.
Yeah. You mentioned something really interesting. So two major themes that I picked up was that one is that you grew up with an entrepreneurial mindset in a family that valued it. And second, and forgive me if I'm misconstruing it, is that coming to terms with mortality on a first-hand basis really drove you to your purpose. Is that right?
Yes,
So let's
100%.
dive into the growing up in an entrepreneurial background.
Yeah.
Tell us more about like some things that you maybe liked about it, some things that were stressful, may have been stressful that you saw people around you
Mm.
growing up.
Oh, we're gonna get deep here. I think the things I really liked about growing up in an entrepreneurial household was that it felt very empowering. And it did feel like you had the opportunity to to do a lot. And yes, there was stress. I liked it. So my dad had very like brick and mortar, I guess, somewhat. He had gas stations,
Okay.
service stations, working on repair. My dad was a Navy guy, worked on jet engines. So
Mhm.
he had like this very great skill, you know, magical when it came to putting things together. Then he did service repair, you know, for a while and had those types of businesses. Then he bought a pool business and he grew that pool business to be the largest in Northern California. And that was really fun. It was a fun time, you know, lots of people coming to our house, lots of routes, you know, trucks, chemicals, like just all of the ins and outs of learning all of the different pieces that were necessary for that business. And my parents didn't really hide. They would discuss business at the dinner table. My dad would do his best to come back to have dinner with us, you know, every night, even if that meant then he was going back out to do some work afterwards. And so I learned a lot. My mom ran the billing. I knew how to answer a phone and talk to people, um, you know, handle sales calls, everything to, you know, postcards and marketing materials. And they let me be a part of that process. So was helping them design some of those things and come up with some of those ideas. So it was a very, you know, fun time. The stressful time is that, you know, the stress that I took from it was this feast or famine, and that sometimes things were doing really well and sometimes they wouldn't be doing really well. And a lot of that had to do with cash flow. And so I got to see how that stressed my mother out in a particular way of the, you know, sometimes you're paying for things, chemicals that you have to use to service, and then some people aren't paying you on time. And I want to say that that's one of the demons I've had to work through a lot is my relationship with money because of that experience and how it kind
Mhm.
of warped my feelings, and still working, still work in progress.
That's a great point, which I'll love to come back to later. But it's nice to know that you got a lot of context switching from a really young age, and that allowed you to kind of parlay that into the business that you're running right now. Let's dive into that. So, who are your clients right now in terms of how do we segment them, and what is the value that you provide to them?
So, three categories of types of people I work with: service based companies who provide some sort of service into the world, technical founders, usually, or a technical founding team that doesn't really have like the love for sales, marketing, customer success. They don't really see how they're going to build from a go to marketing perspective. And then either VCs where they're deploying me into VCs or family offices where they're deploying me into one of their invested companies, or they need help raising themselves. And that strategy around how to raise, which I also help founders with, but I can also help VCs understand that mechanics, especially if they haven't raised before, if they haven't sold before.
How do the clients find you, or how do you find these clients?
Mostly LinkedIn, how you and I met. I connect with a lot of folks on LinkedIn. I have a lot of just open-ended conversations that I don't know where they're going to go. I get a lot of referrals, people referring folks to me, or people follow me and follow my content, which I, speak a lot about some of the struggles that founders are going through, and people reach out to me that way.
Have you looked at some LinkedIn post or some pitch deck that a founder might have shared on LinkedIn? You say, yeah, this person really needs my help. Has that ever happened?
Lots of times. Lots of
Tell us some of
times.
those stories.
I mean, well, when I was working with a client in particular that was creating a matching service for founders and family offices, I looked at hundreds of pitch decks that way. And sometimes it would be really hard because you see the passion that they have for what they're solving in the world, but sometimes they don't have the ability to convey it in a way, or they get confused about the difference between selling their product and selling a company. And that's usually the biggest gap that I uncover in most of the decks, is that they're getting really into the finite details of a particular product and functionality and how it solves the gap in the world. But they forget that a VC is interested, or family office, any investor is interested in, how am I going to make money and how is this going to make a return for me? Those are two very different decks. And that's the biggest challenge that I think that I see repeated over and over again in most of those decks, is everyone wants to tell you about their product.
Are you talking more about what you see lacking is more about the financial piece to it, or more about here's the business jobs that need to be done to solve a particular pain point?
I think, yes, financials. Yes, go to market. The go to market strategy on the slide is, we're going to do paid ads. That's not a strategy. That's just like, in some case, that could be like, let me just throw this money out the window if you don't have a strategy associated with it. So I think very light in the business side of things. Who are going to be my key hires? How are those key hires going to make a difference in this? How are we going to sell? What's our sales motion? How are we going to get our first 10 customers that are going to be evangelists? What are the financial projections based on what we know and what we've heard from the market? Those things are really, really key versus, 8 slides about the product. Because if the product never gets into the hands of a customer, it doesn't make a difference how great the product
Hmm,
is. Product is, and it's hard to say the product is irrelevant by that point, but your product might actually change 4 or 5 times
sure.
before you're even executing on your market plan if you're getting feedback.
And so you don't necessarily help them fix the problem, but you help them think about the problem differently to allow them to fix it themselves. Is that right?
Sometimes, or sometimes I'm getting physically involved. I think it depends on both the aptitude and desire that the founder has. So I have 2 ways that I work with folks. One is a consult where, hey, we're having meetings and I'm kind of sharing, like, here's the direction and here's the changes that I would make and here's my recommendations. You go with your team and you do those
Hmm,
things. Or if they just don't have that capability on the team, or they don't necessarily want to step into that part of the mindset, then I will come in and physically do some of those things, whether that might be drafting projections or go to market plans, or even executing on go to market plans,
okay.
or even
How
inserting
often,
myself into the sales process, for instance, to
really?
help them learn how to sell.
Okay. How often do you think it's a skill issue versus some sort of a hidden thing based on their past performance or based on their past impressions of what they're capable of doing? How do you see between those two?
Which one? I think it's very dependent on the person. What I see is that what makes someone able to get over the hump is the ability to be uncomfortable
With what?
in anything, to go into a
Okay.
position where they might not know everything and still try to perform at the highest level of their capabilities, to arm themselves with everything necessary because the
Mm.
belief they have is in themselves. If that is true, then that is a marker for success. When a founder does not have belief in themselves, when they don't think that they're necessarily the right person, when they are unsure about who they are, then I think that's where it creates challenges that manifest themselves in them not executing certain things a certain way. Even if they have the knowledge, they cannot get past that hurdle. And I don't always uncover that until maybe 2 to 3 weeks into a project, right? Because I'm not necessarily seeing the behaviors of how they react to input, react to education, to whether they can take that and turn that out because they have a belief that I can do anything given education and information.
So a lot of the work that you do is very skilled, providing the skill gaps to those founders. And then you also mentioned that a good amount of work is also removing the emotional bottlenecks. Is it kind of like a 50-50 split, or is it just dependent on the client?
It's very
Obviously dependent
dependent.
on the client.
Yeah, it's very dependent on the client. Some founders are in that zone where they really do have high belief, and I'm sure you've heard the term agency, right? They have high
Yeah,
agency.
that's something I wanted to bring up.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so when you have high agency and you're willing to do things to get things done, right? You have high motivation, you take initiative into your own hands. You are willing to put yourself out there, even if it might not be the right way to do it. You're still willing to try and go for it and put your all for it. That's different than someone who might be more timid, someone who might not even be sure if they should be the CEO, someone who is like, has a lot of self-doubt and may be low on the risk scale
Let
naturally.
me ask a really basic question then. For that kind of a person, what makes them say yes in the first place? That yes, I'm going to be the CEO and I'm going to found this company and here's my life-changing vision, or, you know.
I think the problem that they're solving in the world does. I think it becomes about like the product and the problem that they're solving in the world, and that's they get like, okay, so I have to, more of like a have to than I get to. I have to do this in
Okay.
order to get to that next level and to do that. But the mechanics of a I have to versus I get to, very, very different in the output that drives.
So you work on both pieces. One is you improve the funnel, you improve the tech knowledge gaps that the founder has. And then you're also working on like freeing the founder from some of the inhibitions that they have.
Yeah, and sometimes executive team members too. I don't want to leave them out, but sometimes I'm working also with, executive team members that also might have their own hurdles or traumas from work that they've done in the past, or even some things that they might be holding on to from childhood that are self-limiting beliefs.
From childhood.
Yeah.
Okay. How do you uncover that?
With a lot of trust. It takes a lot of trust and permission to go there. But sometimes just asking a key question or running an exercise. There's an NLP, like neuro linguistics programming technique, where you kind of just ask the person to close their eyes and kind of go back into a scene where they initially felt or saw a certain thing happening that gave them that, belief. And so if they can identify it and then describe that out loud, we ask certain questions like, is it in black and white? Is it in color? Are you in the picture? Are you viewing the picture from the outside? And those types of questions describe to us how present that particular issue is in the person's day to day, how much it's impacting them. For instance, if it's in color and you're inserted in, like you are seeing as if you are still physically in that, It's very present versus I'm on the outside, I'm looking in, it's black and white, it's kind of old. Either way, we try to either solve, get a different outcome in that scene, fade it into black, let it disappear in the clouds. There's a variety of different techniques that you can use that help remove that type of thing. And then we can either use hypnosis or mantras to replace over a series of 30 days with new ideas, new thoughts that are going to contribute to the outcomes or desires that that person wants to achieve in their life, because we need to convince them that this old way of thinking and operating is outdated given the desires and results that they want today.
That is super interesting because what I'm hearing is that you somehow figure out what the invisible scripts are for those really high performing people. You get to the root cause of it. You see if it's resolved, unresolved, or still persistent. You reprogram everything and kind of like quote unquote feed it back to the founder, the VC, the exec. What happens at the end of those 30 days?
Well, typically even
Of the
before then, they're
affirmations of
starting
the
to, even maybe within the first week, they're starting to see things differently. And so they might have different approaches towards things. And it just gets better and better and better as more times goes on. And then it's kind of like a fulfilling prophecy, because the more success they see in doing things different, the more different they want to become. And so it starts to kind of like feed itself to help them move into a different place. It doesn't mean that they won't uncover a different hurdle, but it likely might be something completely different than what we were working on before. And then we can address that if that pops up. But they also become more aware of the things that pop up for them, the voices that they're hearing and listening. And I do a lot to try to understand like how somebody learns, if they're auditory, if they're visual, the type of different learning styles contribute to like then how we would have them work with their mantras, for instance. If somebody's more visual, they might need to write it or to see it. If they're, we might record it and have them listen to it if they're more auditory. So working within that person's unique way that they learn, we're going to try and maximize for them their ability to make a shift.
Do the clients or do the people that you work with know that this might be an approach you might take when they first sign on? No. How do you break past what I'm assuming is a barrier to their acceptance to this approach? Firstly, is there a barrier to acceptance?
I think once somebody realizes that they are unable to get past a certain behavior, then it becomes a very easy conversation around, do you want something different than what you're experiencing right now? And then that is like, hey, to have permission, I'd like to try something. Here's the technique. Are you willing to kind of go for it? Because it takes, even hypnosis, it takes agreement and participation from the other side. No one can hypnotize you without your permission.
I wanted to touch upon that. So there's a perception in popular culture and through the movies that I've seen is that once you're hypnotized, and obviously I haven't undergone, well, not obviously, but I haven't undergone hypnosis, so I don't know any better or worse. What actually happens and what is the quote unquote hold on the other person, if that's even the right term?
Yeah, it's not necessarily a hold. Think of it more as an allowing and a comfort level. So, if you're hypnotizing someone, typically you're going to either like have them count backwards or have them step down. You're basically going deeper in your brain waves and getting down to a more base level where you're directly inputting and talking to your conscious mind. But I can't step you down those layers unless you feel comfortable to step down in those layers and you feel like you're in a safe place and safe environment to do so. That's why you'll see, like, if somebody does that on stage, like the hypnotist, like some people, it just doesn't work on, because they're likely not comfortable enough in a crowded room with people staring at them to get down into a state. And I, by the way, was one of those people. I would not be comfortable enough in that environment for that to happen, for me to relax enough to release, myself and get your brainwaves. Your brainwaves, you think about like meditation helping you drop into a better state. And this is like theta and beta, right? You get down to this beta and we're kind of there. Now we're at this place where you're so relaxed and you're so comfortable that you feel like when you awake that you just had this wonderful deep rest, because
Mm.
it's such a peaceful place for you to get to, but you have to agree and let go in order to get there. And then my job, once we get you there, is to have a conversation with your very literal self, subconscious mind of here's the things that are going to really contribute to your success. You are this, you are that, you can do this, you can do that. Like very carefully placed and positioned reprogramming. And you still have to do that activity for roughly about 30 days for you to continue to get those benefits and for it to really sink in and for it to really reprogramming. I don't find that,
Mm.
I know that there are some people out there that claim like, oh, one and done and you'll quit smoking or whatever
That
it
doesn't
may
work.
be. I think it can for some people if you are convinced that it
Okay.
does. Yeah. If you are
Okay.
convinced that it does and that it made a change, then yes, it can. It could alter your behavior that quickly. I just find with entrepreneurs and some of the things that we're working on, it's not like a quit smoking. It's
Mm.
maybe it's a deeper, because we're dealing with like repetitive thoughts and issues from childhood that we're trying to reprogram. And I find that that takes time.
Yeah, maybe now is the perfect time to go back to your relationship with money. Firstly, how has that changed?
Mm,
What did
yeah.
you think was wrong with it, and where do you think you want to go, and why?
Yeah. So I think that I had this very weird relationship with business and being in business, and this belief that it was always going to be difficult from a financial perspective, that it was always going to be ebbs and flows. And it's something that I continue to work on. And how have I worked on being more abundant? Hypnotism, hypnotize myself and to reprogram my feelings about money. And
Mm.
I do find that helped considerably. It helped considerably make an upgrade. And then I
Okay.
find that I need to continue to make those upgrades, because as I find out more information, I might uncover something new that is in there that, well, I didn't really work on that. And that's showing up now. So I better go either work on that either through mantras or learning, listening to others that have abundance and some of the things that they've done to correct some of those same thoughts and behaviors.
Assume a typical Silicon Valley, you know, big company pusher, high achiever type of personality. How do they reconcile with the softer side of things, the things that don't seem logical on the face of it, but there's a deep-rooted kind of science behind it, or deep-rooted understanding of how the human brain works?
And like you're saying, like the people that are uber successful in Silicon Valley, like how have they gone through this process to realize that about themselves?
So I'm thinking more of like, think of somebody who's the Wolf of Wall Street, and they
Yeah.
have this chest thumping strategy to overcoming any problem.
Yep.
And how do they reconcile when they meet you and they work with you? How do they reconcile their strategy, which gave them an edge until now, to take a very different approach to solving their problems and unblocking them for further growth?
I haven't necessarily worked with a Wolf of Wall Street, but I do work with very successful people or folks that have had success in their career and maybe now they're not experiencing the same. And it is
Okay.
either that they need to change tactics, again, that to drive the outcomes that they want now. And maybe a better example is someone who's been uber successful to get their company to maybe 10 million or 20 million or 30
Hmm.
million. And now they're stuck.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
same thing that got them to that point, and sometimes the same people, the same leaders in the business that got them to that point, it's now not working because the fundamental needs of the business at that size are different. The same agency of you driving and you doing things cannot be the same. You have to now inspire in others. So the stick and the high motivation that you had is not the same as being clear about goals and
Mm.
KPIs and helping motivate others and helping bring others along on the journey, still needing to shift and change. And I think what I also see happen is that at some time in this journey, founder gets tired and they've pushed really, really hard and they've gotten to a certain level of success. And maybe that level of success is the level that they thought they could get to. And
Okay.
now they're kind of limiting
And so in their mind,
themselves.
they've achieved what they set out to achieve.
Yes, or maybe beyond what they thought they could have
Right.
done. And they're really surprised by where they've come. And now they come up for air and they don't know where to go.
Oh, interesting.
And so it stifles the company. You start to get what you see happening is then culture starts to shift and change. People don't necessarily know what's going on in the organization. They don't know what we're doing our jobs. We don't know necessarily what we're doing it for. What's the next set of goals? How are we organized internally? Who's doing what? Seems to shift all of the time. And so there are elements that I can see from the outside looking in where this is very obvious to me, but it is not obvious to the founder necessarily who's in it going through that.
So then after having worked with you, what does then success look like for a founder like that? What is that high agency person? What does it mean in terms of tangible outcomes for the company?
It depends on how long it's been going on. For instance, one of the companies I worked with, this had been going on for quite a while. I want to say like maybe 2 years where they were in this stagnant state before I came in. And what we did first was we did a big group meeting, which was like, okay, now we're going to be doing things differently. Here, let's talk through these, and did it through a series of problems of other companies, like use cases, because it's always easier to see it when you're correcting someone else's problem. And so it got us to the point of building a framework of here we are today and here is where we want to go. And then identifying the gap and the issues and all of the transformation that needed to happen. And then in this particular case, I was not deployed to do any hands-on work of project managing or getting all of those changes in place. And so my role for a year and a half was coaching every single leader in that organization all the way down to the manager level, from executive all the way down, to help them become more transformational.
Okay.
So the outcome was that they would implement those changes in products and they would do those things, which they did. I was in charge of inspiring that change within the individuals and helping them see the vision very clearly, because the leader had decided that he wasn't that communicator. And so he brought me in to be that proxy for that
Mm.
particular piece. He augmented it instead of becoming that kind of leader. He did not want to hold people accountable in that way. Felt
Okay.
uncomfortable.
Okay. Do you think clarity rises from silence or a space?
Are you asking from an organizational standpoint or from a personal standpoint?
Well, both. So a person in a professional place, and if there's just too much chaos going on and there's no deep thinking time, there's no clear strategy, and then it's well, how's the clarity going to bloom in there? It's and not everything is a lotus. But if there's enough space to think, if there's enough silence to think, then maybe good ideas bubble up.
It can,
Okay.
if what's required is the same thinking. If
What
what's
does that mean?
required is if what is required to work on this issue is different thinking, different types of thinking than the way that you've been thinking, then no, I don't believe that more silence will create or drive different outcomes, because the
Because
same level of
sometimes the
thinking.
alternative is, sorry, go
Yeah.
on, more
No, go
conversations,
ahead.
right?
More conversations.
And
So
breaking down the barriers between those conversations.
that's right. And having a culture in which that can happen in a really successful way is
Mm,
sometimes difficult, because by the time you're having those kinds of problems, usually the culture is start to break down where there is silence, to which if there's silence in an organization, you're not getting much conversation, then it's really difficult at that point for that silence to create a better, more evolved thinking.
so April, you're helping all these high-powered people upgrade their own thinking. What's one belief system that you've updated in your own life that's allowed you this success?
This is an ever changing, ever growing thing, but I think the current theme that I've upgraded is that you have to become a different version of yourself in order to get the success that you want. And I think instead of that, what I've replaced that with is that you have to be in more alignment with yourself in order to get the results that you want. And when you move more into alignment, then things and doors open up in a different way than when you're pushing so hard to become a different version of yourself. It's a
Okay.
really tough concept to.
N- Yeah, I think I can relate this back to a conversation. I think it was with you or someone else regarding that we have these different roles. We play these different roles, but then we always have to remember who we are behind those roles. And once we know that, then that allows us to play each of those roles with a lot more ease. Do you
Yes,
think, are you talking about the same thing?
agree.
How do you
Yeah,
find
it's a.
that?
How do you find that? Well, I think part of it is a feel, and the other part of it is not making the goals the master. And I think which is hard because I'm a super goal oriented person. And what I've learned about this conflicts with a lot of like how I've had success, right? So you talk about
Mm,
like a major upgrade. How I've been very successful is being exceptionally task driven and getting a lot of stuff done, probably more stuff than any of my colleagues could get done, handling more things across multiple projects at a time than anybody. I could outpace anyone. And I think the carrot that I dangled in front of myself was that, well, if you just get this extra thing done, then you'll be recognized for this. If you just get this thing done, then you will be blah, blah, blah. If you just get this thing done, then.
hmm
And every failure that came along the way for me was labeled in, well, you just didn't work hard enough and you probably need to put more on your task list because you didn't. You should have done this, you should have done that. And I coach people to not should all over themselves all the time. Yet I did have a lot of that, and maybe I recognize it in others because I suffered from the same thing. So this is like not making the task or the goals the master, but making the goals, because that's who you are moving into alignment. That's your true self coming out. And it is not when you achieve the goal, it is that you are that today. The achievement of the goal
Yeah.
does not make you a different person.
How do you instill this knowledge into someone who's obviously has been so successful working in their own field? Like, how do you help them find the breakthrough through such things?
Well, I want to say, like, I'm often not working with someone who's not experienced a road bump of some point. I mean, that's why they're finding me, is because they have a hurdle to get to a particular outcome. So, someone who's had a lot of success, where I do find that is like maybe someone's had a lot of success in their career working for someone else, but now they're going to be challenged. They want to start something on their own and they want to be committed to self. And that is different than working for someone
Right,
else.
right.
That's, you know,
Got it. So I think the what I take away is that you not only help realize if there's gaps in the current role, but also if, a different role is required for the kind of purpose that that person is going towards. And that really unlocks what the founder, what the VC person, what the executive is looking for. April, this has been such an enlightening conversation, but before I let you go, I do have to ask you, what is a daily practice that you think is super underrated, but that provides you tremendous clarity?
walking
Just out in the nature or just walking?
as much as, even if it's in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And I don't do it often enough, so guilty. over here. But when
Yeah.
I do, I'm very clearly reminded of like how clarifying that can be. I was listening to a podcast, the Shaolin monk, who was talking about how we're just not meant to sit in chairs for like as much as we
It's
do.
so true.
And this connection
Yeah.
between body and our physical and our mindset. And it is not something that I've mastered. So early in my life, I think I had it pretty well mastered, actually. I was, in addition to my career at the same time as I was doing all these projects at Sage, I had a performing arts company. I was dancing professionally at the same time. I write music. And so I felt very imbalanced because I had this very, very physical output, this very physical taxing that made it very easy for me to solve problems in the workplace and maybe made it even better. And I find that, once I hit that transition phase where I was not professionally dancing anymore at a certain age, because maybe the injuries were just coming on too strong,
Mm.
that consistency in finding something else that gave me that same rhythm has not been there. And I've tried painting. I have a very wonderful physical activity of pottery.
Lovely.
Consumed me for a good year, and I need to get back to that. There is something in the physical making of a bowl and having your hands in clay that's also drives that same clarity. So I think somewhere this balance between the physical and the mental, you need to find that for yourself and make sure that you stay in balance.
Yeah. Lovely. April, thank you so much. And if you share the link to your pottery creations, we'll put it on the YouTube video.
I'm not selling them for others. I have a lot of dishes that I've created that I eat
Okay.
out of, but maybe some pictures.
Lovely.